The dress hit the marble floor of the lobby before anyone had a chance to pretend they hadn't seen it thrown. Cecily Holt, 37, had been standing near the concierge desk of the Ashford Grand in downtown Ottawa when her mother-in-law, Vivienne Ashcroft, walked out of the elevator holding a folded garment by 2 fingers, the way someone might carry something they found under a radiator. Vivienne dropped it without ceremony. The silk spread across the floor like water finding its level. "Your things are being moved to a room on the 4th floor, Vivienne said. "The suite is needed for family this weekend." Cecily looked at the dress. It was the navy one she'd worn to the gala where she'd first met Fletcher. She hadn't worn it since. She'd kept it because of that. She understood now that Vivienne had known that. She did not pick it up. She looked at her husband, Fletcher Ashcroft, 41, standing 2 steps behind his mother, with his arms crossed, and his eyes fixed on the floor plan of the marble between his feet. "Is this your decision?" Cecily asked him. Fletcher said nothing. She picked up the dress herself, folded it once, and walked to the elevator. She didn't look back. There was no point in looking at someone who had already decided not to look at you. Cecily and Fletcher had been married for 6 years. She had loved him in the beginning, with the particular intensity of someone who never expected to be chosen. She'd grown up in Sudbury, the daughter of a school librarian and a man who drove long haul through northern Ontario. No one in her family had ever owned more than 1 car at a time. She'd gone to university on academic scholarships, worked nights at a hotel front desk to cover what the scholarships didn't, and finished with a degree in finance and a habit of watching how people spent money more carefully than they watched where they walked. She'd met Fletcher at a fundraiser in Toronto. He was everything she'd never been around. Effortless in that particular way of people who have never once had to calculate whether they could afford a cab. He laughed easily. He wore suits the way most men wore jeans. He introduced her to his father, Douglas Ashcroft, 68, founder of Ashcroft Continental Properties, one of the oldest commercial real estate firms in the country, and Douglas had shaken her hand with both of his and told her Fletcher had good taste. What Douglas didn't say, what no one said, because in families like the Ashcrofts things were felt rather than stated, was that Cecily was not what they had planned for Fletcher. Vivienne made that clear in other ways. A comment about Cecily's shoes at Christmas, a pause before answering when someone asked what Cecily did, the way she arranged seating at dinner so that Cecily was always beside someone being discussed rather than someone doing the discussing. Cecily had for 6 years absorbed this the way stone absorbs rain. She did not argue. She did not cry in front of them. She watched, and she waited, and she kept her own life very separate from the one she lived inside the Ashcroft family's orbit. That separate life was the one none of them had thought to look at. The weekend at the Ashford Grand was Vivienne's idea, a family gathering to celebrate Douglas's 70th birthday, though it was still 6 months away. Cecily had suspected the real purpose was something else the moment the invitation came through Fletcher with a list of who was staying in which room. Her name had not been on the list. When she'd pointed this out, Fletcher had said the assistant must have made a mistake. The assistant had not made a mistake. By the second morning, Cecily understood the shape of what was happening. There was a woman named Sable, introduced as a colleague of Fletcher's from the firm's Vancouver office, who was staying in the room at the end of the same hall. Sable, 33, had the careful ease of someone who'd been briefed on a room's atmosphere before entering it. She knew where to stand. She knew which conversations to join and which to leave alone. She knew Fletcher's coffee order, which Cecily had stopped knowing because Fletcher had stopped telling her things. Vivienne spoke to Sable at dinner the way she had never spoken to Cecily, with warmth that was not performed. Fletcher did not touch Sable in front of his family. He didn't need to. The way he didn't touch her was its own language. Too deliberate, too careful, the restraint of someone suppressing a habit rather than the indifference of a man who simply didn't feel anything. Cecily ate her dinner. She thanked the server by name. She answered Douglas's questions about her week with enough detail to be polite and not enough to be interesting, because Douglas had stopped being interested some time ago. When the evening ended and Fletcher walked with his family to the lounge, Cecily said she was tired and went upstairs. She sat on the bed in the 4th floor room. Smaller than she was accustomed to, the window facing the parkade rather than the river, and she called the one person she always called when she needed to think without the interference of feeling. "It's happening this weekend," she said. "How bad?" said the voice on the other end. "They moved my dress." His mother threw it on the lobby floor. A pause. "Do you need me to come?" "No," Cecily said. "I need you to make sure the Meridian files are ready by Tuesday." Another pause, slightly different in texture. "You're sure?" "I've been sure for 8 months," she said. "I was just waiting to see if I was wrong." She had not been wrong. What the Ashcroft family did not know about Cecily Holt and she had kept her professional name from before the marriage. A decision Fletcher had once found charming, and now perhaps understood differently, was the particular nature of her work. She had left finance after 2 years to join a small acquisitions firm in Waterloo. She'd grown that firm's portfolio steadily, without announcement, making decisions that were conservative on paper and visionary in timing. By the time she was 30, she was a managing partner. By 33, she had restructured the firm into something that no longer resembled what she'd walked into. By 35, operating through a numbered holding company with a board that included her former professor, her accountant, and a retired federal judge who trusted her completely, she had acquired controlling interest in 4 commercial property trusts operating across Ontario, Alberta, and British Columbia. One of those trusts held the institutional financing on 16 of Ashcroft Continental Properties' flagship developments. She had not planned it that way, exactly. The Ashcroft portfolio had been a sound investment. She had bought into it before she understood the full social architecture of the family she'd married into. And by the time she understood, she had decided it was not her obligation to divest. She had done nothing with the position for years. She had simply held it, the way you might keep a key you don't currently need but know the lock for. She had never once used it to benefit herself within the marriage. Not once. Fletcher had struggled with a financing gap on a project in Mississauga 3 years ago, and she had said nothing. She had watched him solve it the long way. She had said nothing because she was not that kind of person, and also because she needed him to understand, someday, what kind of person she was. This weekend had clarified the timeline. On Sunday morning, Fletcher came to her room. He knocked, which was already new. He sat on the chair by the window, the one facing the parkade, and he looked at her with the expression of someone who has rehearsed a conversation so many times it no longer sounds like one. "I think we need to talk about where we are," he said. "Okay," Cecily said. "I don't think this is working." She waited. "I think we've grown apart. I think we want different things. I think—" He stopped. He was struggling with the order of the words, because the order mattered to him in a way it didn't matter to her. She already knew the conclusion. She was just watching him find his way to it. "Is this about Sable?" she asked, the slight tightening around his jaw. "This isn't about one person. That's not what I asked." He looked at the window. "I'm not going to do this, if you're going to make it confrontational." Cecily had a very clear moment of understanding, right then, that she was in a room with a man who believed the conversation was under his management, who believed he was controlling the terms and the timing, who believed, because he always had, that the shape of things was determined by his family's preference and his own comfort, and that the world would arrange itself accordingly. "I'm not being confrontational," she said. "I'm asking you a clear question." Fletcher reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. He set a document on the bed between them. "My lawyer has drawn this up. I think it's fair. I'd like you to look at it." It was a separation agreement. Cecily picked it up. She read it. She read it slowly and thoroughly, the way she read every document, because she had learned early that the dangerous things are never in the headline clauses. They are in the definitions section, in paragraph 4, in the subsection that begins with notwithstanding. She set it down. "I'll have my lawyer look at it," she said. "Of course." Fletcher stood. He seemed relieved, which told her he had expected resistance. The absence of resistance had disoriented him in a way he was trying not to show. "I think this is the right thing, for both of us." Cecily said nothing. She watched him leave. She heard the door click. She sat with the document in her lap for a long moment, and then she made 2 phone calls. The first was to her lawyer. The second was to the chair of the Ashcroft Continental Properties Board. She did not contact the board to expose Fletcher. She contacted the board because 2 weeks earlier, a routine audit disclosure had flagged a series of internal transfers within the Ashcroft Continental operating accounts that her trust's compliance team had forwarded to her. The amounts were not enormous relative to the portfolio. The pattern was, money moved to a private holding company, registered in Fletcher's name, an entity that had not been disclosed to the board or to the institutional investors whose financing underwrote the firm's biggest active projects. Cecily had held that information for 14 days while she decided what kind of person she wanted to be about it. She had decided she wanted to be the kind who followed the law. The board meeting was called for the following Thursday. Cecily did not attend. She was not on the board. She had never needed to be. The trust she controlled was not required to send a representative. It was required to send a letter, which it did, co-signed by her and the retired judge and delivered to the board chair by courier at 9 in the morning. Fletcher called her at 11. "What did you do?" he said. It was not a question. "I disclosed a compliance concern to the appropriate oversight body," she said. "That's Cecily, that's the firm. That's my father's firm. I know whose firm it is." "You're destroying us." She noticed he said us. Not them, not my family, us. It was the first time in a long time that he had included her in a plural. She thought about what that meant, and then she thought about the dress on the lobby floor, and she said, "Fletcher, you destroyed us. I just followed the paperwork." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "How long have you held the financing?" "Since before we were married." Another silence, longer this time. She could hear him working through the arithmetic of what that meant, the years, the decisions, the moments when she could have acted and hadn't. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it wasn't relevant," she said. "And then later, because I wasn't sure you could handle it, and later than that, because I was watching to see who you'd become. And you made yourself clear this weekend." She heard him exhale. She heard under the exhale something she hadn't expected, not anger, collapse, the particular sound of a person whose architecture has just failed all at once. She did not feel satisfaction at that sound she had expected to. She discovered she felt something more complicated and less useful, something adjacent to grief, because she had once loved this man. And the love had been real even when the marriage was not. But she did not say any of that. Some things are not for the person who caused the pain. The board investigated. That process took time and had its own momentum, its own institutional logic, and Cecily stayed outside it. She answered the questions she was legally required to answer. She provided the documentation her compliance team had prepared. She did not characterize Fletcher to the board. She did not tell them what she thought of him, or what he had done to her personally, or what his mother had said about her shoes at Christmas. Those things were not relevant to the financial matter, and Cecily had long believed that mixing personal grievance into professional process was how people lost both. Douglas stepped back from the board within 10 days. He was not pushed. There was nothing against Douglas, who had built the firm honestly and run it honestly, and had simply trusted his son too much, the way fathers do when they have built something they want to believe will outlive their judgment. Vivian called Cecily's mobile once, and Cecily let it go to voicemail, and the voicemail said things that were not worth keeping, and she deleted it. Sable, it emerged, had been working in the Vancouver office on a project that Fletcher had quietly routed through the same undisclosed holding company. This was not relevant to the personal situation, but it clarified certain things about the geometry of it. Fletcher's lawyer reached out to Cecily's lawyer about the separation agreement. Several of the clauses, it turned out, required renegotiation. On a Thursday afternoon in late October, Cecily was in her office in Waterloo, a clean, quiet room with a good window, bookshelves that she had curated herself, a standing desk she'd bought with her own money from her first managing partner bonus, when Lyndon, her executive assistant, put through a call. "It's him," Lyndon said. Cecily considered this for a moment, then put it through. Fletcher's voice was quieter than she'd heard it in years. Not defeated, she had known him long enough to know the difference between a man who is broken and a man who is recalibrating, and Fletcher was always recalibrating, but genuinely quieter. "The kind of quiet that costs something. I want you to know," he said, "that I understand what I did. To you. Not just the financial thing. What I let my family do, what I let happen." Cecily said nothing. She was looking at her window. "I'm not asking for anything, I just thought you deserved to hear that." She sat with this for a long moment. "I do," she said. "Thank you." There was a pause. Then he said, "I didn't know. About the trust. I know you didn't. Was any of it real? The marriage?" She thought about this carefully, because she was a person who thought carefully about things, and also because he deserved a careful answer even now, especially now. "Yes," she said. "The beginning was real. I think we just became different people, and neither of us was honest about it fast enough." Another pause. "You would have told me," he said. "Eventually, about the trust." "Eventually," she agreed. When it mattered." He was quiet. She heard him understand in that quiet that it had mattered the moment he set a separation agreement on the bed between them. That the timing had not been her cruelty but his choice. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. She put down the phone and sat for a moment, looking at nothing in particular. Then she opened the Meridian file on her screen, and she got back to work. There was a presentation in the morning and a deal to close by end of week, and a firm that she had built quietly, without anyone's help or anyone's permission, that still required her full attention. It always had. That had never been the problem.